All right, well, we are starting our show with some breaking news regarding the Canadian Premier League and the Halifax Wanderers. As you can tell by Jordan's reaction, he is at the helm of it. Jordan, I'll pass this one over to you. What are you hearing right now?
This is how I always react, though. This is how I start most shows like this. I'm like, this is nice, 30 minutes of juice. I just want to clarify I'm not a reporter. I've just heard a few things, and they are pertinent. So we got to
Sounds like a
share it with the
reporter.
people. Nah, I know, but don't put that as a title. I have many things, but not that. But what I'm hearing is probably the most charismatic manager in Canadian football might be heading to the Halifax Wanderers, and that is
Gareth Wheeler?
Mr. No. Even though I think this is the only person that Gareth Wheeler would be okay to be like, you know what, I'll put him ahead of me. And that is
Right.
Vanni Sartini. The deal's not done, but I've heard that he is very close. They made him an offer that he can't refuse, and he's thinking about taking over the East Coast. This would be a major signing. Vanni Sartini coming to the CPL. And look, it's something that people who follow him closely would probably dream about because he's shown that he has affinity for this country. He shows that he knows the landscape and he can make the most out of young players. But heading to the CPL, heading to the Halifax Wanderers, that would just be a huge signing. So I'm hearing that it's very close to being done. But guys, if this happens, Ollie, if this happens, this has to be the biggest thing for Halifax Wanderers ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, great scoop from our new reporter, first and foremost.
Don't do it, Ollie.
Well done, Jordan. Look, this is a guy who's won, multiple Canadian championships, right? Has coached at the MLS level, but beyond that, like Jordan just talked about it, it's the personality, it's the way Vanni Sartini is, the way he goes about his business that I think makes him such a massive potential hire. If the Halifax Wanderers can get this over the line. I think this is what you look for in the Canadian Premier League when you're trying to build clubs and build the profile of clubs. It's not just a great coach, but someone who's a great ambassador as well. And I don't think there's anyone in Canadian soccer who fits that description as well as Vanni Sartini. So it would be an absolutely enormous hire for the Wanderers, one of the bigger ones that, players and coaches, I would say, that you've seen in the history of the Canadian Premier League, and someone who I think would be fantastic for this league, just the way he conducts himself and how media friendly he is. And you look at the job he did at the Whitecaps, that was a club. I understand that there's Axel Schuster and a lot more people involved in that, and he'd be the first to say that as well. But I think the personality, how likable he is, was really a huge part of turning that club around from one that was in pretty much a state of disarray to what you see now, where that it's really captured kind of the attention of that city of Vancouver. So if he can have anything like that effect in Halifax, it'll be a wonderful hire.
Jordan, I'll come back to you here. How do you think this will change the expectations for the Halifax Wanderers going into 2026?
Yeah, they can't be finishing fourth and fifth or fifth. There's no look. Respectfully, I like the way Halifax Wanderers have played. I always think their fans deserve a lot. With just everything about that's the fact that they're the only East Coast team, and the football that they play, the fact that fans are there every single week, they'll rally behind a guy like Vanni Sartini. What this means, though, with his pedigree and what he comes in with, they have to be competing at the top. I'm not saying finishing third. I'm saying playing in a North Star Cup final, potentially competing with Forge or Calgary or Atletico Ottawa, whoever's at the top, they got to be there. The thing with Vanni Sartini too, he has a certain brand. They won't play much different than they did this year under Patrice Geyser, who had actually a lot of influence and connection with Vanni Sartini from his time when he was just kind of coaching for Halifax Wanderers with the Whitecaps. But they'll still play with that three in the back. The difference with this is if they can land Vanni Sartini and he ends up being head coach or sporting director, he's going to recruit who he wants and bring them in, and people will want to play for him. So with already that core that Halifax Wanderers have, adding a few new pieces, getting a couple goal scorers, getting a few midfielders or defenders that he trusts, this has to be a championship caliber team. So immediately coming into the league, Ollie, there's going to be pressure, even more pressure than Halifax Wanderers. But you could think about that front office. This is the direction that we want to go. Speaking about Patrice Geyser and what he's done, it wasn't that he was a poor manager. They just want to go in a certain direction. If they can land Vanni Sartini, that is the first step of saying we want to be the team to beat in this league. And I love that approach. It's very progressive. I hope it works out for them.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go with it. I think if you decide to make a change from Patrice Geyser, as much as that last season maybe didn't finish the way they wanted and didn't quite hit the heights that they were hoping to, he finished in the top 4 2 out of 3 seasons. That's not easy to do in the Canadian Premier League. Outside of Forge and Cavalry, it's not been done that often. And I think if you were going to decide to move on from him, you have to be thinking, we're going to swing big. We're really going to push it here. We're going to put some pressure on ourselves, as Jordan said, that there's going to be high expectations on this club going forwards. And this is the kind of hire that does that. So I think they've absolutely achieved that.
We've alluded to it a little bit already, but I want to make the claim and write it in stone here if you feel like you can. Is this the biggest signing in CPL history? Players, coaches, the whole thing encompassing it, Jordan?
To quote the great Christian Jack, I'm going to say undoubtedly. I can't do it in a British accent, but absolutely, undoubtedly. Absolutely it is. Look, when Daniil Henry, I remember talking to Ollie about it. I was like, there's a player coming to the league. Ollie knew, but this was when we were friends, but we weren't besties. So he didn't want to tell me or reveal the name of Daniil Henry at the time. No, he just said it's going to be huge for the league. And I remember seeing Daniil come in. I was like, this is a big signing based on the fact this is the back end of him being at a World Cup, the presence that he played for Canada, and like what it would mean, because he got it. He understood like having a domestic league in Canada, what it would mean, and just his CV and his resume as a player. But this is different because you're giving the keys to Vanni Sartini of Halifax Wanderers as coach, sporting director, leader. He's going to be all over the place. And with his CV, this is the biggest signing ever. Hence why I'm getting really excited about it, even though it's not done. We have to say that it's close, but what I'm hearing, it's still not done. The ink hasn't dried. However, if Halifax Wanderers can get this over the line, there isn't a bigger signing than him or than this in CPL history.
Ollie?
Yeah, it feels similar to the Daniil Henry one in a way, where you've got someone who has obviously played or operated at a higher level, who's not saying, kind of turning their nose up and looking down at the CPL and saying, that I don't know if I want to go to that level, but giving the league, that credibility of deciding, yes, this is something that I want to be part of. And I think it's really significant when someone like a Daniil Henry or Vanni Sartini decides to do that. I think it's easy maybe to jump onto something a few years down the line when it's become bigger and more popular and more successful, but to actually get in on the ground floor and be part of building it, I think that tells you something about those people. I'd say that about Daniil Henry, and I'd say it about Vanni Sartini as well, in terms of their genuine care for Canadian soccer and want to kind of be involved in and build the future. So yeah, I can't think of one that would be bigger, to be honest.
Matt, quickly before we move on, before we get when you talk about Bobby Smirniotis or you talk about Tommy Wooden Jr., there are players that want to go and play for those clubs because of those managers. The pull that Halifax Wanderers would get for having Vanni Sartini there, because they know a coach like him can make a player who's good be great, or a player who's on the verge of making a move actually make a move. So to give him the keys, players from high and low, from far and wide, are going to want to play for Halifax Wanderers based on what he can do with a unit and a group. So again, this is undoubtedly the biggest signing if it gets over the line.
It's an important thing to note. There's a lot of passion from the episode coming this morning, but you're right. This is the former head coach of the Whitecaps. He won multiple Canadian championships with them and steered them through a really difficult transition. He is beloved by Canada soccer fans, so continue to tune into OSD the rest of the week as we continue to uncover what is undoubtedly the biggest signing in CPL history.
Well done, Mac.